Hi and hello, watch fans, and welcome to another edition of the Real Time Show. With me, your friendly neighborhood jeweler, Aloma Joseph. I don't have the infamous Rob Nuds from Dresden in the house. Oh no, it's my turn to sit down with our in-house provocateur, David Vaucher, other known as David Vaucher, in Fontainebleau in Greater Paris. Welcome, David.
Bonjour, Adon. I hope that my Dutch accent someday is as good as your French one. Well done.
I do not talk with a French accent. Who is it that? It's funny. We had amazing feedback in the TRTS network. I asked our TRTS fam what we can improve. They were very kind on us because they showered us in compliments, and we really, really had to push them to give feedback. So after twisting their arm virtually, they said Rob and I need to work on our French pronunciations. So
Okay.
Here goes. So David, let's start off with where you are. So Fontainebleau, and I hope I pronounced that properly.
Almost there. Fontainebleau would be
Fontainebleau.
There you go. Yeah.
Is for me synonymous to INSEAD.
That is, for a lot of people, it is. And so for those who don't know, INSEAD is a globally renowned business school, which I think started in the 50s. And it is a big part of the city's commerce. But for those who don't know Fontainebleau, and maybe this is a good thing because it keeps the tourists out, but everyone thinks of Versailles when they think of French chateaus. But the Chateau of Fontainebleau is huge. I think it might be bigger than Versailles. And that's another big part of kind of what the town is known for. So very happy to be here. I get to see Paris when I want to and retreat back to quieter places when I've had enough.
So it's south of Paris. How far are you from the center of Paris?
So this is one of the things I very much appreciate from having kind of changed my scenery from Texas, where you needed a car, was here, especially in the Paris area. You can get around by train pretty much anywhere. So we are about a 45-minute train ride directly to the Gare de Lyon, which is super convenient.
So if you go watch shopping, is it Fontainebleau or is it Paris?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think, Paris... Okay, Paris, full stop, because that's just where all the brands are. Fontainebleau does have a couple of jewelers who sell... There's an Oris AD here, which has a couple of Oris watches in the window all the time. They can do basic repairs, but I think being so close to Paris, that's probably where you want to go. Put it this way. If I had a Patek Philippe, I don't think, all due respect to the watchmakers here, I think I just take it to Patek in Paris, if that makes sense.
Okay, shotgun. Favorite watch store in Paris?
Tough one. I'll just say Dubai. That's kind of the most easy. That's Dubail. It's the most accessible for us, but I've heard some very good things. And maybe you've met him, Alan, because I think your circle must be pretty small. His name is Antoine de Macedo. And he's quite a well-known vintage dealer here in Paris. So I'd love to go check out his place at some point.
So Dubai originally was at Place Vendôme. I saw they opened up in Champs-Élysées as well.
Yeah, that's right.
They are actually a very silent force because they are epic to me because they very early on did a lot of IWC collabs.
Okay.
So that's how I know them. I don't know them personally. I believe it's still family owned. ADM Antoine, I actually have not met in person yet, but he came on my radar thanks to his Nomos collab. So you see the power of collabs. It really works as a good business card to introduce yourself to the world. And my favorite, hands down, is Lolo. From Chrono Passion.
Okay.
And Saint-Honoré.
Okay, then I will add that to my list of places to check out eventually. No, that's the thing. I was thinking about this morning. You just get so used to having certain things. You take things for granted. Like I've got this chateau down the road from me that I don't really bat an eye at anymore. And I'm right next to Paris, like one of the watch capitals of the world. And I still haven't done the full watch tour. So I will add that to my list of places to visit.
Talking of getting together, we are still working on getting a TRTS get together organized. I'm hoping it's going to be Amsterdam. We're working on it. Our dear and esteemed member Bianca from Down Under is coming to Europe. She's going to do a European tour. The Stockholm Mafia, the force is very strong with them. So I guess we're fighting over Stockholm versus Amsterdam. But until then, the most popular get-together organization for watch nerds like us is Red Bar Crew Amsterdam. I had an amazing one last night in Amsterdam again. I haven't never asked you, are you a member of a Red Bar Crew?
So interestingly enough, I was in the very early days of the Houston watch community. So before that even became Red Bar, there's a group that was getting together. The gentleman that runs that now, his name is Michael Jatney. So shout out to him if he's listening. I think he's the leader of Red Bar Houston and has done some really good things to grow it. I kind of fell off, did not attend as much. And with my current situation, I know there is a Red Bar Paris group. But the last time I checked, and Alan, this question is motivating me to check again, it was relatively dormant. There really wasn't too much going on. So as of now, I'm aware of what the community looks like in Paris, or at least I think I am, but not an active member.
So that gives us an excellent segue into the first question from our mailbag. This one comes from Richard Swords, our esteemed Swiss member, who always uses the old school email, which we love. Thank you for that, Richard. He asks us, would you know if there's a Red Bar active in Switzerland? I live in Basel. We'll be curious to attend a get-together, though I might feel like the new kid at school. So I am not aware. Are you aware, David, by any chance?
No, but I think while you're talking, I'll do a quick Google. I would be shocked if there weren't, because I know that Red Bar is a U.S. founded institution. I think it was New York. It seems like Switzerland would be ground zero for another one. So I'm not aware, but I would be shocked, and I will double check that right now.
I am also in depth for an answer because I had the honor to set up Red Bar Amsterdam. Is the only one in the Netherlands. We have great attendance from Belgian citizens as well. So that's very cool. We have some German members. Kudos to HQ in New York, indeed, for Red Bar. But the thing is, people sometimes complain it's not professional enough. But you have to remember, this is all run by individuals and volunteers. So this is not a commercial organization. Memberships are almost always free, or as far as I know, they're always free. And as chapter heads, we talk a lot to each other. There are obviously annual Red Bar get-togethers. Unfortunately, I've never made it out to one yet. I did reconnect with my buddy Banu Chopra, who moved from the US to Prague. He is one of the founders, chapter heads of the Czech Red Bar Crew. So we were exchanging a bit of war stories and how things are done, because every chapter runs its own show. So, and you're right, it would surprise me if there isn't a Basel chapter, because come on, the best fairs for the watch business for 103 years, may it rest in peace, was in Basel, obviously. So I do believe I've seen a Red Bar Switzerland handle, but Richard will check it out. Did your query find anything, or did you ask our chat botty?
Yeah, I should have. So for everyone who has listened to the show and did the AI episode knows we were looking for a name. So we have settled on Clarice. So Clarice, I have not asked. However, my quick cursory Google search says that there is a Red Bar Switzerland. I found an Instagram page for that. It's got 1,400 followers, so it's not zero, but it's not huge either. 200 posts, which to me says it's probably somewhat active. But when I tried to get granular, like Red Bar Geneva, I didn't find anything. So anyone interested in a Swiss Red Bar, maybe try the Instagram account and then message it, see what you get, and definitely drop us a line and tell us what you found out.
While David said that, I had a look as well. I see in their bio there is an email address, redbar@bluewind.ch. So I would try that, Richard. If you don't get a response, send me a DM and I'll check with HQ if I can find you a contact person for Red Bar Switzerland.
Okay, next one, Alan. I think this is something that longtime TRTS listeners will know as a favorite topic of mine, but for newer listeners or just anyone looking to get a bit more depth, I think this is a good question that was highlighted on our mailbag here. So the question is from John Miller. Came to us via Instagram DM. And John says, David, I heard on the show you love fashion and also watches. That's true. These fashion brands make. Why do you think the watch collectors bash so much on fashion houses that make watches? And Alon, I think we're going to get some good comments from the both of us because I am wearing a Cartier Santos, and one of your favorite watches among your large collection is the Bulgari Octo Finissimo. So two watches from two fashion brands.
Sorry, I need to jump in. I want to provoke you now because you're provoking me.
Do it.
Let's have a philosophical discussion. And I'm sorry, John, thank you for the question. Let's have a discussion. I do not call Cartier and Bulgari fashion houses.
Okay, all right.
Let's talk about them. They're jewelers.
Yes. Okay.
And Bulgari maybe makes handbags. And would you call that fashion? No, I would still call that a métier d'art.
Yeah.
How was my French pronunciation, by the way?
So it's actually very good. Métier d'art is how I would say it. So you were very close, yeah.
So guys, we're getting French lessons on the show. So métier d'art, and Cartier technically also, I believe, makes bags, but I would dare to say they're not fashion houses.
That's fair. So Alon makes an important point there. I think the question from John can probably be generalized to watches that come from non-established watch brands, because what Alon says is important. It probably takes us one step. Well, it does. It takes us one step away from the continuum of fashion to watches. And it's an important point because in the article, which everyone is welcome to go check out, I basically said, look, everyone does tend to look down on these watches. And I listed certain brands. I listed Montblanc, Hermes, Cartier, and you could certainly put Bulgari in that list as well. And the important point is that they are not fashion houses. So it's actually really important Alon brought that up, because I think that the main reason there is such an issue is that the true fashion houses, so I'm thinking here of Burberry, Armani, Tommy Hilfiger, Polo's an exception. We've talked about them. Let's just leave them aside for now. But brands like Burberry, Armani, Tommy, they will just license their name, and you end up with watches that are not very good, and you are paying a premium. And that puts a bad taste in people's mouths and positions them in a way so as not to like these particular watches. When you get to the point that Alon's talking about, where we have very, very, high-end luxury brands like Cartier and Bulgari making watches, you can't call them an established watchmaker in the sense that Vacheron Constantin is, for example. But you also can't say that they're not serious. We'll mention Piaget as well in that kind of trifecta. And you can't say they're not serious because, and I made this point in the article, they have no incentive to do anything poorly, because anything that's done poorly tarnishes the rest of the brand and it turns off the very high-end customers. The other thing to keep in mind, and the reason I like them a lot, is that I forget where I heard this, but when you look at a brand, I'm not going to say fashion, but a high-end brand like a Cartier or Bulgari, even if they didn't have access to high complicated movements, which they do to an extent, but you're paying for the design. And the expression I heard is that the design is like a complication for them. And so if you want that aesthetic in a very well done package, you have a harder time finding that from other brands who rely perhaps just on being very good watchmakers. So I will just take a break to let Alon speak, but I would say that I think that is where the unfairness comes from. Is I think you have to separate the true fashion brands from the jewelry brands, and then recognize that if you look at the jewelry brands, you don't get a watch that doesn't have a tourbillon. You actually get a watch that has fantastic design, even if it does have a movement that's a little bit, more down market, if that makes sense. Alon, what do you think?
I like it where you took it. So you saved yourself. No, but all kidding aside, I do think that we should segment those two, and I guess you concur with me. So let's look at John Miller's question. So you are a huge proponent of, you love fashion and you love fashion brands. You have written some awesome articles that we have recorded into an article. So definitely go back and listen to them, please. One of them is we spoke a lot about Ralph Lauren, which all three of us like as a brand. And we had a heated debate about the watches in our article analysis episode. Now, let's look at his question. So he asked, why do you think watch collectors bash so much on fashion houses that make watches? So let's look at that, David. What do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think it goes, I mean, you're absolutely right. You have to separate, because when you say fashion is huge, right? There's a lower end, there's a mid-tier and a high end. So when we say fashion, are we talking about Tommy Hilfiger, which is a brand I love?
Let's dissect it. So let's do those brands that came from making clothing garments.
Okay.
And then moved into other categories like sunglasses, perfume, and watches.
Okay.
So that is Armani. That's Tommy Hilfiger. That's Michael Kors. And let's go up in the ranks of exclusivity or métier d'art. And let's take it up all the way to Hermès and Chanel, which I believe are at the pinnacle of horlogerie being a fashion house. Do you agree with me?
I would agree. Yeah. I mean, I think if you're going to say like top tier, you have to include Chanel for sure.
So take it away. Take as long as you want. The mic is yours.
Oh, man. Okay. All right. So I should be clear to everyone here, and I've said this before, is that one of the things I love about the Real Time Show is that we don't have any kind of snobism. None. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, a G-Shock is just as interesting as a Rolex, and Rob and Alan will back me up with their own preferences, which span the whole price spectrum. And for me, that carries into clothing as well. I think good clothing, good design is universal. And so when I say, okay, let's start at Tommy Hilfiger, I have nothing but respect for that brand. It's been a huge part of my upbringing, and I love what they do. However, I have to recognize, and I think, I'm speaking for Tommy Hilfiger himself, but, I'm also not, that this is a mass market brand. And so when they look at making watches, they don't, I believe, see it as anything different from selling sunglasses or, anything like that. It's just a product that makes sense to do in their portfolio. And so what they will do, and they're not the only ones. I think, Alan, I think Swatch, is it Calvin Klein watches that's in their portfolio? There's one quite well-known brand.
Used to be.
Okay.
It was kind of a joint venture.
Okay.
And, it was a license to Swatch Group, but I believe today, don't pin me on it, it's either Movado Group.
Okay.
Or Timex or one of the American groups, I believe, has the license today.
So they will just license the name out. And so Swatch is one of the companies that can handle that license. Bedrock, I think, and I haven't looked into this in a while, but the Fossil Group, the founder of Fossil, which probably does licensing as well, started another venture called Bedrock. Bedrock then had Shinola and Filson under it. And so there was a watch licensing kind of agreement being done there. And then also there's just numerous white label brands in Switzerland that you can call and say, hey, I've got a logo and a name I'd like to put on a watch. What can you do for me? And I think those, they serve a purpose. I mean, if someone is of a younger age or doesn't have a lot of money, but likes the style, because again, whether it's Tommy Hilfiger or Chanel, the style is an important part of why we buy watches. And I don't think Tommy Hilfiger's style is less good than Chanel's. It's different. And so if you like that styling, I think great. You should buy yourself a watch from that brand. I think where it gets difficult is that when you know what a good watch is, quote, and what a, quote, bad watch is, and you sort of know what the relative values are, you might start to stray from, oh, this is a really nice looking Tommy Hilfiger watch or Burberry watch or Armani watch. And you might find yourself saying, oh, well, it's a quartz movement and they're asking $400 for this. Like, just go get a Seiko. Not realizing that to a lot of people, actually, Seiko is that's the brand that makes the $50, department store quartz watches, right? So if there is a predisposition to not take non-established brands seriously, I think it comes from the fact that the lower tier clothing brands have done a relatively lazy job, and I use that in very loose quotes, of licensing their watches out. And the ones that have tried, like Ralph Lauren, have gotten punished. So, Alan, before I move up to the higher end, do you have any thoughts to add to that on the lower tier discussion?
We've discussed this on air that it's very interesting what strategy these fashion houses follow. I mean by that, do they see a watch as a short-term fashion object that's obsolete very quickly, like example, perfumes, sunglasses, or shoes, so in a bracket of 100 to 400 euros? Or do they really see it as making the best item that can be made, which obviously Chanel and Hermes and today Louis Vuitton do, and therefore compete with the highest level of horlogerie? And that's an interesting decision-making process. And then maybe we can do an article about that and then an analysis episode afterwards, because we like to play what if we were CEOs of watch brands, right? We could do that for fashion houses. Is why did Armani never opt for making horlogerie? Because in the fashion world, especially with his black label, the Giorgio Armani label, because he has many labels, he did create the most beautiful garments and designs in the 80s and 90s for sure. So why didn't he make the best watches out there? And we discussed this on air that I believe we saw him team up with a manufacturer. I don't remember if it was
Parmigiani.
Was it Parmigiani? I think it was Parmigiani flavor, but then we never heard about it. Zegna, I believe, did something with Gérard Perregaux, and you never heard about it again. So it's interesting why they would opt for that. Now, Chanel and Hermes is maybe logical that they try to operate in the horlogerie sector because their handbags, their core business, or the leather goods are maybe the best out there. So that's an interesting analysis of what these fashion houses do. So maybe you can shed a light on that when analyzing, David.
So now we're moving up market here, and let's just jump to the higher end. And I think one of the things to remember here is that, like Alan said, it's a choice. So one of the brands I'm going to call out is Tom Ford. So Tom Ford is it's considered to be the pinnacle of American luxury. They're known for phenomenal suiting, phenomenal fragrance. For those who don't know, Tom Ford is just a name. I mean, that was the designer that really took Gucci into the stratosphere when he was the creative head. So he has a real pedigree in high fashion. But go take a look at a Tom Ford watch and go take a look at what they cost. It's absurd. I mean, it's just, that to me is where you're paying entirely for a name and not quality in watches. So it is a choice. A fashion watch, or I apologize, a high fashion watch or a jewelry brand watch doesn't have to be great. It comes from real effort on the part of these brands. So when you look at a brand like Hermes, or let's take Cartier. Cartier, I think, is a bit of an exception, but Cartier, as Alan said, was a jeweler. Cartier, in fact, Mr. Cartier invented the first wristwatch, the first pilot watch, in fact. Piaget has a huge heritage in jewelry, and they've made watches for a long time. Hermes as well. When I was doing some research for the fashion watch article, I think the first Hermes watch, I think, came out in the 20s, 1927, if I remember correctly. So they make a very conscious choice to do this properly, unlike some other brands out there. And the reason for that, as I said, is that if you're Hermes and you're selling, Birkin bags that start at $10,000, you can't afford to make a terrible watch for the price. And you certainly don't want to sell a watch that costs 300 euros, because you're going to turn off, and this is one of the maybe more distasteful parts of the luxury business, but you're going to turn off those who spend more money with the brand. So you have to do it properly. I think that it is in a brand's DNA to do it properly. I don't know anyone at Hermes personally, but I don't think any of them would be okay doing anything in a subpar manner. I just don't think it's in the DNA of the company. And also, we have to remember that not only is there the desire to do a fantastic product, whether that's watches or anything else, there's the money backing it. I mean, if you look at brands like Louis Vuitton, I mean, come on, it's an endless war chest with which to make watches. Hermes is the same. Cartier is Richemont backed. So there is the desire to make watches. There are the means to make watches, and very good ones, right? I mean, we're not talking about getting Etta Movements. They can invest in their own manufacturers. They can do their own thing. And so I would say that the watches are great. And the last thing I'll say, Alan, before I turn it back over to you for comment, is that you can take advantage of this. If you're a watch buyer and you have a little bit of extra money and you're a little bit experimental, this is to your benefit, because you can pick up an excellent watch that looks like nothing else you're going to find from the established brands for very little money, because of the fact that the kind of overall perceptions that these are worth less than something from a Rolex or an Omega or a Patek or something like that. So, Alan, what do you think so far in that assessment?
Very interesting. You're very right that Cartier was very innovative, did indeed make the first wristwatch for men, because the first one for ladies was Patek Philippe, already at the end of the 19th century. So
I didn't know that. Okay. Well, I learned that today. Yep. Okay.
Whenever we say women's watches are not that important, they're very important. So that's very cool. Cartier was good friends with Santos. He came to visit him, and then he explained he literally had a problem navigating, so he needed time to navigate, to fly. So that's why he created the Santos watch. I've probably said this on air, but a tip, and I'm not sure if you read the book by Francesca Cartier-Brittle, The Cartiers, The Untold Story of the Family Behind the Jewelry Empire. I highly, highly, highly recommend it.
Okay.
Very cool.
Okay.
For watch nerds, historians, and people that love jewelry. So very cool book. And it shows you also the evolution of all the Cartier watches. So and the history. It's very cool. Very cool book. So I highly recommend that. Regarding the fashion houses, I think that what you said about Vuitton especially is very interesting. The willingness. We've discussed this also on air, that there are 5 heirs to the current owner of LVMH, the mother company of Louis Vuitton. And 3 of them are very, very much interested in watches. And Frédéric Arnault just recently got promoted from CEO of Tag Heuer to head of watchmaking LVMH. So that's interesting. We had musical chairs. So Julien Tourneur went from CEO Zenith to CEO Tag Heuer. And then we have a new CEO come into Zenith, which I personally don't know him, and I forgot his name, and he comes from Panerai as COO. Now, in line of this question, I have an interesting for you, David. I saw a little teaser this week on Insta by Tag Heuer, Eyewear, Chapter 2.
Oh, wow.
What do you think of that? Let's turn this 180 degrees upside down. Watchmaker makes sunglasses and perfume, because Omega does it too.
They do.
What do you think of that?
They do. And I think quick correction. Is it Frédéric or Jean that was elevated to?
Jean is at La Fabrique du Temps and Louis Vuitton watchmaking, and he's still there.
Okay.
He's the youngest of the 5.
Okay.
The eldest are, I believe, Antoine, and I forgot his sister's name. They are in the board of LVMH.
Uh-huh.
And then you have Alexandre, who went from Rimowa to New York to be something MT of Tiffany & Co.
Got it. Okay. So for everyone listening, that was a good summary, and watch this space, because I think it's going to get even more interesting in the future. But okay, to your question, I bet you that a lot of people didn't know, Alan, before I get to Omega, that Swatch actually makes sunglasses as well. And I have a pair in my desk right next to me, because I was curious as to what they were like. And I got them on Vinted, which for non-Europeans is a kind of a well-known clothing marketplace. I think I paid €10 for them. And they're cool. They're fun. They're of the level that you would expect a pair of Swatch sunglasses to be. So, with regards to watch brands doing other things, let's talk about Omega first, because they're the best example that I know of in terms of commercializing goods. Because if you poke around Instagram long enough, you'll realize that there's quite a bit of watch swag that ADs will give out with watch purchases. I mean, like I've seen Rolex wallets, I've seen IWC passport holders, really nice ones actually, Santoni leather and everything. But I don't think you can actually, let me park that. You can't buy them as far as I know, but just let me park that real quick and get back to it. So Omega does. They have a perfume, cologne, which is Aquaterra, which I own, also bought on Vinted. And they have a jewelry line. So they sell men's rings, which kind of have motifs that are reminiscent of a Seamaster bezel. They sell eyewear, and they sell jewelry. And my thoughts on that are that it can't be a huge part of their business, but it is pricey for what it is. So one of the pieces that my wife bought me for our anniversary, it's called an Omega sailing bracelet. And this comes up occasionally on the forums when someone buys one. It's actually a very nice, it looks like braided rubber, but it's just molded rubber. It's got a nautical theme to it. And it costs, I think, 300 euros for something that definitely did not cost 300 euros to make. But it is well made. It's reminiscent of Omega. And as someone who loves Omega watches, I do like wearing it. So I would say, Alan, to answer your question on Omega first, it's one of those things where I don't think it's a huge part of the business, but the company knows that as long as they do it well, they're going to sell enough to enthusiasts that it'll be worth the investment. So then let's get to TAG, making eyewear. You know, to me, it doesn't make a ton of sense in the sense that I don't know how devoted TAG buyers are. Maybe there are some super hardcore ones, but they probably look at it like, well, you know, we have this automotive heritage and there's no shortage of race car drivers wearing sunglasses and looking cool. And on top of that, because we have the backing of LVMH, I'm assuming they can make these glasses for almost nothing and display them and sell them. And again, make it worth their while and really sort of test out what the market might be for larger sort of offerings. So I would say that it kind of goes back to the jewelry house or fashion house making watches discussion. If you can do it well and it doesn't hurt your brand to do it, I would say, you know, go for it. It's very different for TAG to sell a $10 pair of plastic sunglasses and sell something that is very well made and on a quality par with, for example, like a Randolph or a Ray-Ban or something like that.
Should Rolex make other products than watches to sell? I'm not talking about the goodies and marketing promotion items.
So I'll tell you what, this is actually a really good place to come back to when I said, let me park that thought for a second, because I read an article. It came up on my Watchicity feed. So if anyone uses that, it's just kind of an aggregator for news. And apparently, certain watch brands are turning to streetwear. So the example that I read was Breitling apparently has in their boutiques a range of clothing that you can buy. So I'm assuming it's aviator jackets. I think there were some t-shirts there. I don't remember the exact product mix, but apparently this is a thing where watch companies are getting into streetwear so that those who love the brand or those who maybe can't afford a watch but still want to represent the brand can buy. So with regards to Rolex doing this, I don't think it's quite their style to do so, even though, like I said, there is a fair amount of swag floating around. I have seen bottles of Rolex cologne being sold online, and I've seen Rolex wallets. So I would say this, that in the hypothetical case where Rolex said, we're going to make sunglasses, we're going to make leather goods, I'll tell you this, Alan, I would have no hesitation buying any of it from a quality point of view, because I'm sure it would be up to Rolex standards. Now, whether or not I preferred carrying a Rolex wallet versus a Cartier wallet, or in my case, an ST Dupont wallet, which we can definitely talk about if we have time for later in the show. But I would have zero qualms from a quality point of view, because if Rolex makes a crappy wallet, it will reflect poorly on their watches, and that reflects poorly on the brand. So from a quality standpoint, they can make whatever they want, because I know it will be fantastic when it hits consumers' hands.
So technically, could I summarize this? David Vaucher thinks whomever enters a new product category and delivers the quality they do in other categories and compete up to par with the established competitors, they have your blessing.
Yeah, I think so. Ultimately, I think the world has enough stuff. So if you're going to put something out there, do it well. And we as watch collectors, I think we like to see ourselves as discerning people. So we should be able to discern a brand that is doing it properly and not doing it properly, and then kind of vote with our currency afterwards based on that assessment.
I think that's a beautiful philosophy, and this Q&A is a half of the core analysis vibe. So sorry guys, we're confusing you. So let's go quickly to the next question in our mailbag. Christopher from the network asks, what advice would you give to somebody that would like to make their own brand, but don't have the guts to leave a job with steady income and just make it happen?
And Alan, I'll let you start. I have my thoughts, but I know you're highly entrepreneurial as well. So what do you think?
So my favorite marketing slogan ever is Nike's. Just do it. Close second was one that Adidas used not so long though. I don't know why, which is impossible is nothing. Then I'll add my own passion is everything. So if you're going to do something, do it because that's your passion, it's your calling, and you feel you need to do it. People romanticize entrepreneurship. They have an illusion that you have more free time, you can do whatever you want, and you have more freedom and less stress. All these things are exactly the opposite. You have less time because you're working 24/7. But hey, if your hobby is your work, you never work, right? Second, you will not do only what you like because suddenly you need to do everything. You're going to be a jack of all trades. Think of bookkeeping, administration, sales, after sales. And if you're not selling, creating, you're a CEO, you're CFO, you're a CMO, you're a COO, etc., etc., etc. Wealth is not guaranteed. It's proven that 85% of startups go bankrupt within 18 months. So the statistics are stacked against you. But I truly believe that if you do what you love, you'll succeed. Now, I do a lot of mentoring and coaching. Old, young, established entrepreneurs, people who want to become entrepreneurs. Now, the first thing I ask them is, what makes you tick? Where do you want to be in X amount of years? And we create a case study where we paint everything black, meaning we make worst case scenarios. If somebody has a partner, a life partner, I ask them, what will that person do if X, Y, or Z happens? So in a black situation, it means you're bankrupt, you lost all your money. What will happen? What effects does that have on your finance, but also your family? What does it do to your psyche? And I also asked them, why do you want to become an entrepreneur, right? I mean, you have amazing entrepreneurs in a big corporate setting. I mean, a person that runs a BU, a business unit, who says he or she is not entrepreneurial, if you catch my drift. So I'm very curious what you think on this topic, David.
Yeah, so this question kind of got me thinking immediately when I saw it, because I actually tried to start my own watch brand and failed miserably. So maybe I'll tell that whole story afterwards. But I think for the purpose of just today's episode, I'm going to try and summarize my thoughts in what I think entrepreneurship is generally, and then share a little bit of my experience with this failed watch brand. And then I'll kind of jump to the question specifically. So I guess, everyone thinks of entrepreneur an entrepreneur as someone who says, screw it, I'm betting the house and I'm taking a huge risk. And it's fine when it works, because I think that when you hear about successful entrepreneurs, there is a huge survivorship bias. Like, you're only hearing about the ones that made it and not the ones who fail. And so I would argue that entrepreneurship is really about risk reduction. So if you can imagine, like, a hypothetical, set an image of in your head where you are in front of the Grand Canyon and you're a mile back from it, and your job is to make it over the canyon, right? And so to do that, you've got a catapult or a cannon, and you're going to put yourself in it and you're going to launch yourself. Well, if you do that, there's a high chance you're going to fall into the canyon, right? And so your job as an entrepreneur is to evaluate the distance from over the canyon, which is success, and then get as close as possible to the edge. And then let's assume that you're all powerful in this scenario. You'd want to close that canyon completely so that your kind of path to success is literally just taking a few steps over the line and making it. So when I hear things like, how can I quit my job and make it happen? I fantasized so many times about doing this. And in hindsight, it would have been a terrible idea, because there are so many things that you can do to mitigate risk in terms of starting a watch brand. So you can, for example, design a watch while you're working, right? You can get feedback on it to really tweak the design to make sure that it fulfills some kind of need. Because remember, I just said the world has a ton of stuff. Well, the micro brand space is looking pretty saturated, right? So you'd want to test what your design looks like. You can get pre-sales. You can do all kinds of things to where you don't have to quit your day job to be an entrepreneur and then be successful. So going back to my experience, I started a brand, and the kind of idea, this was in 2016, so it was a very different time. It was to have 100% Swiss-made watch, because without getting into it, Swiss-made does not mean 100% Swiss-made. I wanted to get as close as possible as I could. And so while I was working, I did supplier research. I even went and visited a factory in Geneva. I priced everything out. I made a web page. I made a promotional video. And in the end, I failed. I chalk it up to a lot of different things, but it didn't work out. And I would say that it's not that I couldn't have made it if I'd quit my job and just done it, but the likelihood would have been small, right? So just remember that is entrepreneurship in watches. You don't have to quit to still be productive and to lower that risk. And the last thing I would say on that topic is really this. Again, you have to really evaluate, like Alan was getting at, what is entrepreneurship? Because to be a watch brand could mean a lot of different things, right? A watch brand could mean, starting something from scratch. It could mean starting a service center. I mean, there is a huge, huge lack of watchmaking talent in the industry, right? So just starting a watch servicing facility, technically that's a watch brand. You could also sell accessories, right? Like the saying during the gold rush was, don't go pan for gold, sell shovels. And that's how Levi's got started. That's how Filson got started. So really understanding that it's not just making watches that puts you in the industry goes a long way towards reducing that risk, which is ultimately, I think, what being a successful entrepreneur is about. It's not gambling the whole time. Anyone can do that. It's intelligently evaluating, what are the risks I'm facing? What do I need to do to get over those risks? And then make it happen afterwards.
Interesting. And why did you want to start a watch brand?
So part of it was I just didn't like what I was doing at the time. I mean, I learned a lot from it, but I just, like everyone, I have, like you said, Alan, I have this dream, which I still have to an extent, of having total agency over what I do. Even if the reality is different, the perception is that I have total agency. The other one really was very sincere, and which was I like to be told things that are true. And so when I found out that Swiss made did not mean Swiss made, that kind of sat wrongly with me. And so I did a little bit of research online and found that there might be a case for it. And this was actually, Alan, I'm sure you know this, but maybe some listeners don't, but this was before Moser got into it because they made the Swiss cheese watch. Do you remember that?
Definitely. And a quick side note for those that are not aware, up until a few years ago, if 50% of the spare parts were manufactured in Switzerland, and I believe 80 or 90% of the value of assemblies done in Switzerland, you had the right to put Swiss made on the product. After many debates and push and shove in Switzerland politics, they jacked that up to only 60%. Many high-end brands communicate that they're 100% Swiss made. I believe that's lost. One of them that I know does that is Breitling, for example. They started with that 12, 13 years ago. But that often comes as a shock to consumers. So it's interesting that you mentioned that there, because obviously it annoyed you.
It did. But at the same time, if I look back at one of the mistakes I made was to assume that because it bothered me, it bothered a sufficient number of people out there. And it may have been something that caught the industry's attention when Moser did it. But when, David Vaucher, who no one in the Swiss watch industry cares about, right? Like, what does it really matter? And I think, again, that goes back to this question of risk reduction, is that in today's market, which is super crowded, I mean, I could present the idea again today and maybe it would get traction, but what about the design, right? What about the marketing? It really is about really asking yourself, is there actually a need for what I'm proposing? Because there are so many micro brands out there, so many watch brands out there. Could I connect with that messaging? And I'm still not sure I could, because Alan, like you said, they raised the standards, but not by that much. It's not 100% anymore. And the watch industry sold record numbers of watches, or exported record numbers of watches last year, right? So it really is a matter of asking yourself, is there a product market fit for what I'm trying to be an entrepreneur on?
I'm actually shocked that you didn't want to make 100% French watch.
Oh, tough. I'd love to. No, France, for those who don't know, France has a long history in watches, but it's just not there anymore. Trying to get to it, but not there yet.
So on this topic, and we're deviating from the original question, but I agree that if you radiate Swissness as a brand, you should go as high as possible. It's obviously not difficult to do 50 or 60%. I do understand that sometimes, like in the car industry, the same goes for the watch industry, it's very difficult to get to a 100%. Just take leather watch straps, for example. The best are obviously in France. Austria is not bad. Italy's good. But in Switzerland themselves, they don't really make that many amazing leather straps. And same goes from the title manufacture. I don't think anybody coined it in legal terms. Definitely not Swiss governments. But we usually, as an unwritten rule in the industry or retailers, we say on average, if 80% is built in-house, so spare parts made in-house, it's designed by the brand, the caliber, spare parts up to about 80%, and then obviously made on your own premises, so built, assembled, then we think that a brand is eligible to use the term manufacture. Why 80 and not 100? Because up to a few years ago, there was one or two only that could make hairsprings, or there are only a few companies who make the jewels, the rubies, the synthetic rubies. So 100 is very difficult, but 50 or 60 doesn't. But let's take it to cars. So we all think that with the EV market booming in Europe or worldwide, so electric vehicles, a lot of people have an anti-China sentiment in the West. So they would prefer to buy, let's say, a Tesla over BYD, Build Your Dreams, or a NIO, or Geely. But the irony of it is, Tesla 3s in Europe all are shipped from China to Europe. So what is American about that car, right? So it's very interesting what the psyche does of linking nationality of a brand to a product, don't you think?
Oh, huge. I mean, another example in the cars is BMW. I think they have a huge plant in South Carolina that they make cars out of. And as a French person, yeah, I have a deep pride for the things that, my country produces. Another example, let's go back to fashion. Louis Vuitton actually opened up a factory near San Antonio in Texas. So, think about what that does for perception of the brand. And it's a difficult issue in a world of globalized supply chains. But at the same time, I do believe that if you tell consumers something, you should deliver on that. And it gets a little bit hairy, actually, Alan, than what you were saying, because my understanding when I read the original Swiss-made rulings, this was before they upped it, was that you could assign R&D and design costs to that project, right? So if you have a Swiss engineer designing a watch for a lower end Swiss brand, you just spread that out over the watch production, and boom, you've got your 60%, right? So that's what didn't sit very well with me. I do, yeah, call me old fashioned, but I believe if it says Swiss made on the dial, it should be Swiss made, even if the realities of the 21st century make that quite difficult.
So I vote for transparency. Be honest about what you do, and there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in there, especially in the watch industry, but especially the Swiss industry, because a lot of spare parts are made in Asia, as if that's a bad thing. So we've been chatting away. I see we're creeping towards the end of our episodes, our first Q&A together, David. I want to end it maybe on a positive note that there is nothing wrong with the Sino culture of quality.
Absolutely not.
In car making and not in watchmaking, because I was super happy to learn about Robin Talendier's journey in Chinese watchmaking with their young brand Atelier Wen, W-E-N.
Yep.
I invite all our listeners to listen to episode 129 if you haven't already, because I am a huge fan of Asian culture, not only Japanese, but definitely Chinese. And they are very important to timekeeping, the history of timekeeping. Think of pagodas and the water clock. And I don't know if you know about a brand that used to exist called CTQ, the Chinese timekeeper. And the irony of it is both are French that lived in China and made a Chinese brand. So it makes it almost full circle. And I kind of want to end this episode on that note, that if it's about passion, craftsmanship, and art, that will always thrive for entrepreneurs and managers that have entrepreneurial spirits. I want to thank you all for listening to this episode. You can find all our previous episodes on our official website, www.therealtime.show, and you can find us on Instagram via @therealtime.show. If you want to support the show, please subscribe, like, rate, and share with your friends. If you have any questions, feedback, and or criticism, please do send us a message. You can also DM us if you want to join the TRTS community. You can find David via Instagram @DAVAUCHER. Rob, you can email at his address, rob@therealtime.show. On IG, you can find him at robnuds, and you can message me via email, alon@therealtime.show, and you can find me on the gram at Alon Ben Joseph. Stay sane and keep on ticking.